Thanks everyone for joining us this evening. It's actually morning in the Philippines. It's 9:30 in the morning here. And so welcome, mabuhay from the Philippines. Uh, this is our Mentoring Matters talk for October. And our topic for this session is about navigating our journeys as mentors and mentees. And this is our agenda. I will go ahead and do a quick intro about the Mentoring Club. For those people who are not yet familiar with the Mentoring Club, I know we have a great number of people here who are already part of the community. Thank you. Thank you very much for being here. And then I will turn over the floor to Lesley for the main content. And after her presentation and Q&A, we will do some announcements. So just a reminder, we are on all of these social media platforms, and you will get a copy of the materials after the session. And of course, I would like to be able to thank all the people responsible for helping our community with the events, fundraising, marketing, platform maintenance, and of course, fundraising and legal. And for this particular event, a special mention to Breen, John, Hong, and of course, Lesley for being our speaker. Who are we? Who is the Mentoring Club? We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Our mission is to provide a mentoring community for aspiring and seasoned leaders. We are a global community so that anywhere in the world, people in the workforce who are looking for mentors can find them, connect with them, and help them develop the skills they need to achieve their career and life goals. And we want to help mentees make sure that they find meaningful work so that the leader in them comes out and they are able to create positive impact in the world. And our long-term vision is that as mentees become successful leaders, that they will also become mentors to others. These are some of our mentees, a tribute to our mentors. And this is the mentee community needs as of June 30th, 2021. And you can see that a lot of the requirements are around human relationship skills, or what we traditionally call soft skills. There are some domain expertise that are needed, like entrepreneurship, digital marketing, and some technical aspects, obviously, because we are in Silicon Valley. But this gives you a good idea of what our mentee community has expressed they need help on. And the last piece that I would like to share about the Mentoring Club are our leadership core values. So the first three is all about trust. Integrity, honesty, and commitment are what make us trustworthy as individuals and professionals. The second two are about leadership. Vision and execution allows us to become successful leaders. We have to have both recognition that both are needed. If you're good at visioning, find somebody who can help you execute. If you're good at execution, find somebody's vision to execute with. And then the last three is all about community. Humanity, contentment, and family are the social grounding forces that eventually make us happy and successful as leaders. So that is what the Mentoring Club is about. Again, thank you to all of you who are already part of the community. And if you're thinking of being part of the community, if this is your first time, please consider having a session with me if you're interested to find out more. And for today's topic, we are focusing on our journeys as mentees and as mentors. Dr. Lesley Petersen, I met her, as I mentioned earlier to those who arrived earlier, I met her through Clubhouse. She actually found us. She found our room. We were discussing topics around leadership, empathy, and self-awareness. And our message resonated with her, so she connected with me and expressed her interest to become a mentor, and now she's with us. So Lesley, I will go ahead and stop sharing and allow you to do your introduction and present your material.
Thanks very much, Lesley, and lovely to be here, and hello to everyone who is in the webinar today. Just to give you a little bit of information, background about myself, I come from an education background, so I've worked in the education space for a number of years, mainly as a mentor and a teacher mentor. And then when I did my PhD, while I was still full-time working, I wanted to find out how mentoring supported people's practice, and I did that research in the education context. I looked at how teachers could build their practice as effective teachers through mentoring, and that sort of became the springboard for my business. So I work for myself now, and a lot of my work is with medium to large organizations, helping them design and implement really effective mentoring programs. And then a really nice core piece of that work is to work with the mentors in particular, work with mentees too, but working with mentors in terms of mentoring mentors. And so helping them become really confident in their practice as a mentor and what that means to them, and then obviously how they build those relationships with mentees. At the same time, though, which is why today is for me is a real opportunity and a privilege to present the material that we're going to go through today, is that mentees sometimes don't get as much of the focus as I think they should. I work with some organisations where they want to provide mentor training, but they don't think mentees need the training as well, and I certainly don't agree with that. So I really, really look forward to having this presentation look at both of those roles, because I think they're equally important when we put them into that mentoring space and that mentoring relationship. So I'm going to share my screen and get started. This is about navigating your journey as a mentor or a mentee. And what I'm going to talk through today and get you to be thinking about and talking with each other about is, as a mentee or as a mentor, what that journey looks like for you, and what are some of those what we call best practices, or those essential skills that enable us to mentor well, be an effective mentor, and also how we can be an effective mentee. So how do we get the most value and benefit from that mentoring relationship and the mentoring support that you're getting? And as I said earlier, I think we need to look at both. I think it's really, really important that we do. So that's what the opportunity is here for you today, in either of those roles, or perhaps you're in both of those roles, maybe a mentor of someone and a mentee of someone. And roadmaps. Today, I'm going to talk through and get you thinking about your identity as a mentor or a mentee, and what are those core attributes? What are those interpersonal qualities and those skills and knowledge that you bring to that role, and how that very, very strongly influences the relationship that you have with each other in that mentoring relationship, and how, again, you can benefit from that by bringing those skills and knowledge and qualities to the relationship. I talk about essential mentoring skills in the main there. I'm going to talk through three particular communication skills that I think are core to being a mentor or mentee, core to us as professionals and in our personal lives too, but particularly putting it in that mentoring context. And I call those the essential mentoring skills. Again, in your roadmap, it's the importance of doing that self-evaluation. So, actually doing the check-in and the reviewing all the time about, and that reflection about, so, how am I going as a mentor? What influence am I having on my mentee? What are some of the things that I'm doing well? What are some of the things that perhaps I could do better or differently? And the same for a mentee, for you as a mentee. What is it that I'm getting from this mentoring support? Am I making changes that I want to make? Is there a difference that's happening for me from this? And how is that working? How is that mentoring helping me do that? So self-evaluation to me is a very, very important component of our practice as mentors and mentees. And then lastly, to finish today, will be around your action plan. So just thinking about, so where to from here? What are my takeaways from today? What will I do with that? And just to let you know that there will be some time at the end for question and answer session. So I've factored that into the timing here. If you do have some questions as we're going through and you don't want to lose that, either write it down or pop it in the chat box, and we can have a look at that at the end. So that's your roadmap, and that's my roadmap for you for today. The first step, this whole thing about identity. What is our identity as a mentor or a mentee? And this is a model that I use a lot in my work, where I get mentors and mentees to ask themselves that question: how do I show up? And let's put that in the context of how do I show up in the workplace? How do I show up in that mentoring partnership or that mentoring relationship? And although I use this more for mentors to be thinking about this in terms of their interactions and the ways in which they are supporting their mentee, I think as a mentee, you can apply the same model. So getting you thinking about that you can't help others achieve. So even as as mentees, and you know, if we're leaders, we may be a mentee, but we're actually in those leadership roles as well. So we are influencing other people in that space. And so I think that's why it's a good question for both of us, both mentors and mentees. So you can't help others achieve and get somewhere unless you, one, know yourself. So that's self. You know how your behavior and your communication impacts on and influences other people. The second part of it in the model is that in doing that, you also are noticing how people are responding to you, your behavior and communication, and you are seeking feedback from them. And feedback's core. It's such a core skill, and we'll look at that as we get into the session a bit more. So that's know yourself, know how you behave and your communication style and skills, notice other people's responses to those and ask for feedback. And then you've got that third step where you can then provide that support. So whether you're a mentor for your mentee or whether you're a mentee in a leadership role, looking at supporting, seeking and feedback from your team and or employees, and how then you can support them. So a model that is a really nice, in fact, a lot of what I've tried to do today is to provide a number of different tools and models and frameworks that you can use as reflective tools and models for your own practice and your own thinking. Again, still in that first roadmap step of identity, these are some questions that I think are really useful for you to ask yourself. And I should say we, because I'm in a mentor role as well. So for me, it's important that I'm continually reflecting on my practice as a mentor and asking myself these sorts of questions to help guide that reflection. So I'm not going to read through them all, but just thinking about that importance of reflecting by using some really core key questions that can help you do that, to review and really analyze what you're doing in your practice, how you're operating as a mentee, how you're operating as a mentor. So what I'd like you to do, just briefly here, we're going to do a couple of other opportunities where you can talk to each other and talk with and interact with the material. What I'd just like you to do here now is thinking about whether you're in a mentor role or a mentee role. In the chat box, just take a minute. What are your, either going further down that list there, what are either your intentions as a mentor or a mentee? What's one? Or what's your purpose? Which I think is always a really good question, is what is my purpose as a mentor? What is my purpose or my intentions as a mentee? So I'm just going to briefly pause to let you have a think about that for a minute and pop something in the chat box if you want to, or you might just choose to think about that question. What are my intentions or my purpose as a mentor or a mentee? Okay, so I'm actually going to have a quick look here. Purpose is to be a positive role model and invite my mentee to become more self-aware and grow, to relieve possible anxiety in a young person about career options. Great. Okay, I'm going to move on, but really just to make a point, and as Lesley said, get a copy, people will be able to get a copy of this following the webinar, the session, and please do think about using these sorts of questions for your own reflection of your practice. Okay, so still sitting in that first phase of our roadmap in terms of our identity. A tool that I developed a number of years ago and I use in my mentoring training. So when I'm training mentors and training mentees, I find that a very, very useful activity, again, as a thinking, but also an opportunity for people to talk to each other about this and to get some clarification around this, is these things we call attributes. And so this is the mentor attributes profile, or map. And what you're seeing in front of you is the table that's sort of like in a training workshop, groups of people come together at a table. They have one of those charts or one of those tables of the map, and then they have to decide in their group what are the core attributes, the knowledge, professional skills and knowledge, and the interpersonal qualities that the mentor and myself as a mentor needs to have and needs to bring to that mentor role. There's a plethora of qualities and skills in the literature. So you could say, look, there's all of these is what we need to have as a mentor. But for me, the challenge, for myself and the challenge that I put to you is, what are those core attributes that you need as a mentor. And then, as you see, the next one is or as a mentee, because I think it's as important, like I said at the start, that as a mentee, you think about those qualities or those attributes that you are bringing to that mentoring relationship, that you're bringing in terms of your identity as well. So what I'd like you to do, we're going to actually get you into breakout groups to have a discussion about this, but I'm just going to go back to this one here, the mentor attributes profile. What if you've got your phone with you, because when we go into the breakout groups, you won't be able to see this. If you could just quickly take a shot of the attributes, so there's a few examples there. If you just want to take a photo of those that you can then refer to in your breakout group. And then for those of you, and I mean, you all might like to take the photo of the mentor and the mentee attributes, but again, taking a photo with your phone of these attributes for the mentee, what I call the IMP, the ideal mentee profile. And then you can refer to those in your breakout group. The activity, what I'd like you to do, one, take a photo. We're going to, Lesley's now going to put you into breakout groups, and you have probably 3 to 5 minutes. We were thinking 5 minutes, but I think we'll make it 3 minutes. I've put 5 there, sorry. 3 minutes. And I want you in your groups to think about what would be 3 core professional skills and knowledge and 3 core interpersonal qualities that you think a mentor or a mentee needs to have. Okay, so and use that, like that map, you know, that chart, pretend you've got that in front of you. What are those? What are 3? So you have to make a decision around those. You can't just say, well, all of them, because they're all important. So that's a bit of the challenge. What are the core ones? And then when we come back, we'll see, we'll just perhaps just talk through that. But the main thing here is in your breakout groups, talk with each other about what do you think are those core attributes, the core skills and knowledge and the core interpersonal qualities. At the end, rather than sharing your ideas now, at the end, when we have the Q&A session, we will have some time to, you know, if you want to share what you thought about that, but really just to, I think, reiterate the importance of and the idea that, you know, reflecting on your practice, part of that reflection as a mentor or a mentee is what are those, particularly those interpersonal qualities. I think that's just core to who we are as a mentor or a mentee. What are those things that I do, that I bring, that are part of my makeup that absolutely create that mentoring space, that mentoring place that I want to, where people feel safe, that relationship is built on trust and all those things. So I'm sure in your groups you had a chance to think about that, talk about that. And again, you know, the next thing for you will be, what am I, you know, I've talked about it with other people, but when I think about myself as a mentor or mentee, what are my core attributes? So something for you to really sort of use as a good reflective tool. Okay, so that was sort of stage 1 or step 1 of the roadmap, which is your identity. Let's have a look at step 2 or stage 2, which is I talked about the essential skills, and then sort of talked, you know, said how these are the essential communication skills of mentoring. And I've put in there, well, that's not a communication skill, but I had to put in that whole area around trust and building trust, because really that's the cornerstone of any relationship, and it's definitely the cornerstone of our relationship in that mentoring space. So I want to actually look and talk briefly about trust first, and then we'll just talk through and step through these 3 key communication skills that I think both mentors and mentees need when we talk about our best practice or a good practice, that we need to actually have these skills. But just talk about trust, you know, as a classic, is the cornerstone of any relationship. And, you know, we haven't spent time here saying, well, you know, how do we define mentoring and what does that mean for us? But that's a core part of that conversation when it comes to actually mentoring, is about that trusting and trusting relationship and those trusted people, trusted partners in that relationship, be that the mentor or the mentee. And so I think it's a conversation that's important to have as a mentor or mentee with each other, and it's an important concept and an important part of, or practice of, your relationship or partnership, that you continually check in on and you continually make sure that trust is there, because if it's not, then, you know, that relationship is going to be it will suffer. So I've just got here some ideas around, well, what trust isn't, and therefore what trust is. And there's some questions, again, reflective questions that you can use, you know, and work through in your own time. But, you know, trust isn't, you know, what trust isn't, it's trust isn't a lack of alignment between words and actions. There has to be alignment. That it isn't a lack of empathy. Trust isn't about a lack of empathy. Unethical behaviour. I think I've got that wrong the wrong way, but that's right. And then, thinking about all those things those behaviours that we engage in that we know create and build trust, and being really aware in our relationships, in our mentoring relationships, that's what we intend. Intention is a really strong word. It's a word I use a lot, that our intentions are to create and build that relationship and that environment where trust does exist, and where the confidentiality is kept, where the mentor or the mentee, let's say the mentee is very, as a mentee, you're comfortable in terms of sharing and talking about what's important for you or what's happening to you, being able to unpack things, solve all those sorts of things. And that if trust isn't there, it's just not going to happen. It isn't going to happen. So those questions, I think, are really good questions to ask yourself as a reflective tool. So when you think about people in your life whom you trust, what do they do that engenders that trust, your trust in them? What are their behaviours and communication and all those and those interpersonal qualities that they have? What is it that they do that engenders that trust that you have in them? And therefore, how do you build trust and how do you maintain trust in your mentoring relationships, be that you're a mentor or a mentee? And then that self-reflection again is so what is it about myself that enables my mentor or my mentee to trust me? What is it that I do? I think they're really, really powerful questions to ask ourselves when we talk about trust as being like that foundation for that, whatever else happens in that mentoring relationship. So just some good questions that you might find useful to, again, another tool that you could use in your toolkit to do reflecting on your practice as a mentor or a mentee. Trust, as I say, the cornerstone, the underpinning, all of those words we can put to the mentoring relationship. Then let's look at what we talked about, those essential communication skills. And I talk about listening. Well, listening, as we know, is a fundamental communication skill, again, in any relationship, any situation we're in where other people are involved. In the mentoring space, I really, really like this whole concept of empathic listening that comes from Stephen Covey's work. And he talks about empathic listening being that, or actually, sorry, in the first instance, which is why I put it in here, because I think it's a good comparison, a good way to think about it, is when we're not really listening. And we could spend a lot of time talking about listening because there is so much involved in it. But Covey says that we're not really listening when we are evaluating. So we think we're listening to the other person, but we're actually just trying to work out whether we agree or disagree with what they're saying. So we're not really listening because we've gone back into ourselves to try and think about, well, what's our response to that? What do do I agree or disagree? What if I disagree with what they're saying? So you actually got caught up in your own thinking again. Covey also says that we're not really listening when we're advising. And that's a really interesting word because over the last few weeks, I've had conversations about what's mentoring and what's coaching. And how many people have said to me that mentoring is all about advising someone? And my response to that is not necessarily. Advising is, if it's not asked for it, then really what you're doing is you've decided what's the right solution or the right answer or the right action to take for that other person, the mentee. And you haven't actually found out what their situation is, what their context is. You haven't given them time to tell you that because you're actually already jumping in and saying, well, I know what you need to do with this. So advising isn't necessarily a mentor or a mentoring skill. It's something I think we have to be very aware that we're doing and how we do that. And Covey also talks that third one there about we're not really listening when we're interpreting. And so what he means there is that we're trying to work out the other person based on how we would act or behave. What would be our motivation for this? So once again, we've gone back into our own thinking, brought it back to ourselves and trying to work that out. So we're not really listening to the other person.
There's listening to a person's words, and then there's listening to, I'll call it an underlying concern, which they might have that they're not putting in words. Trying to join your observations of their body language and everything else. And I guess what I'm trying to get to here is, I would argue it's almost straightforward to hear the words and maybe even pay attention to them. But the underlying emotional driver and trying to figure that out, ooh, that's tough. At least for me it is. I don't know if the rest of you.
Sure. Yep. Thanks, John. And when we look at the next bit, I'd like to address that a little bit. But you're spot on that. And I think that's the thing is that, well, in fact, let me just go to the next slide, because I think partly, and I'm still going to be quoting Covey here, part of this will address or talk to some of what you've just mentioned there in that first quote. But also what I'm going to talk about following this, which I think will help as well. But he talks about listening as true listening means that you forget about yourself and concentrate all of your energies on being with the other person in real time. The next part that we're going to talk about, an essential skill, is this thing around questioning, and they go together. So given what you were just talking about there, John, when we to think about how well we ask questions is when we can actually delve deeper, find out. But I think it's that word intention again, that our intention is to do that, and being aware, as you say, that sometimes you are just hearing the words and you know that there's something happening underneath. But that's where I think where the skillful questioning comes in, which I'm going to talk to brief soon. So just to sort of talk a little bit more about Covey's idea of this empathic listening. I really like that quote. I think it is very true that, and I think it is a skill that we do actually forget about ourselves, and that we do concentrate all of our energies with being with the other person in real time. And as he says at the bottom there, even if your intention is to help the other person, giving them advice without being asked can end up damaging relationships. And I fully adhere to that, which is what I was saying before. So again, some questions there that you can use as a reflective tool for yourself when you're thinking about your questioning skills. It's like, think about a time when someone didn't really listen, wasn't listening to you, but prescribing an answer well before you were ready to, you'd finished, so to put it. And how did you feel about that? And then think for yourself, it's like, when do I most often fail to listen to others, and why? And what is it? Is there something going on for me? Is it the environment in which it's happening? Is it that I haven't primed the environment so that actually there are no interruptions and disruptions and things like that? Or something that's happening for myself? And then that third question is like, so how can I change, or how can we change our listening? What could I be doing differently? So another reflective tool or framework for you to put into your toolkit for your own reflection is a mentor or a mentee. And hey, equally important for as a skill for both mentors and mentees. We need to both, when I'm a mentee, it's just as important for me to listen really carefully as it is as a mentor. So what we'd like you to do is going to do a quick poll. So on a scale of 1 to 10, so she's going to start the poll in a minute, how would you rate your skill level to listen empathically? So even if you think about it I'm not really quite sure if I'm an empathic listener yet, but even just thinking about it from the how would you rate your skill level as a listener, and in this mentoring context that we're putting it in, what would you rate yourself as 1 being not that good at all to 10 being actually, an excellent listener? Put that poll out there. It'll be interesting to see what people, what the range is, what people say. A lot of people sitting at 8, 9, no 10s. And some of you, I think interesting, like, there's a 6%, you've sort of identified 3. I think that's where, if you're a mentor or mentee, we're spending that time thinking about what effective good listening is, empathic listening, and thinking about, like those questions that I just suggested you ask yourself is like, what happens when people don't listen to me and how do I feel? And so what am I doing when I'm not listening? And that empathy is that if you don't like it, all the things you don't like about it is how you put yourself in that position too when you're the person who is having to listen. So some of the things, thinking about some of those things you can do to change your listening habits. And I like to use that word habits because I think part of it is a habit where you can move up the scale, or, if people wanting to move further than that. So like, as I put in there, it's like, what can you do to move towards 10? And there's lots of different skills. One of the things that I talk about a lot is like, just be silent, like actually practice being silent, that you don't always have to be talking. You don't always have to be filling the gaps. I know we can feel quite uncomfortable when there is a pause, But it's so easy to feel like, oh, I must say something because the other person isn't talking. And it might be that they're thinking through something before they keep talking. So it's like, what are some of those things that you need to do or want to do? And I think want is an important word here as well, to shift that practice of how well you listen and whether you listen empathically. Okay, so thanks for that. That's this next, well, the second essential communication skill, which coming back to, I think, with what you were talking about, John, is that, you know, to listen effectively, we actually have to be really good at asking questions and asking good questions. And I will explain good in a minute. As a mentor and as a mentee, I think it's just as important that as a mentee, we are good at and get good at asking questions of our mentor. As a leader, you know, we need to be skillful in our questioning to actually find out what's going on, to find out what people are wanting to do in their career. Perhaps if they've got problems if they're facing, we have to get really good at questioning. And there's, like you'll see, you know, I've sort of talked there about like create question banks around particular areas where you might find that you're going to be needing or wanting to have a conversation. So it could be around career, it could be around leadership development, it could be around managing conflict. But what I've got there, the model that I've put together and I've given you here is what I call the decision-making pyramid. And I think this is really an important part of skillful questioning, that we don't just go and pick a question and say, well, like, you know, this person we're going to, you know, they're managing or they're dealing with some conflict at the moment. So I've got some questions that I can ask around that. The decision, you make some decisions before you do that, or you make decisions with that intention. And it's almost hierarchical. That the first thing you need to think about is what's the purpose of the question that I'm going to ask? Why am I going to ask this question? Where does it fit? Rather than just, gosh, you know, I'll ask some questions and we'll see if we can find out what's going on. And what's your desired outcome from asking that question? What are you hoping that will help that person do in terms of uncovering, identifying, sorting through, solving, whatever that might be? And because you're then clear about the purpose, the why you're asking that question, it's then also which is the right question, which are some good questions to ask that fit that purpose. And then lastly, the process. So when do you ask those questions and how? Like, is there an order or a sequence in which you can ask them that's going to be most beneficial for that other person to be able to answer them, to be able to understand why you're asking that question in the first place, or those questions? So I think it's really important to have that decision-making model sitting behind this thing that we call skillful questioning as mentors and as mentees. So really on the other side, I was just in this slide, I just some ideas about, you know, to put together some question banks and make them relevant to the purpose. What's the purpose? What might be that purpose of the conversation? Also continuums, which I'm going to give you an example of a continuum in the next slide. That continuum is about, you know, the process. It's like, well, is there a sequence in the way in which you can ask questions to help that person along? And then there's some models. A lot of you will probably be familiar with the GROW model, which is actually more of a coaching model, seen as a coaching model, but I think it's just as relevant as a mentoring questioning model. The what, so what, now what. There's a great little activity called Stop, Start, Continue, Change, which you might be familiar with. If you Google it, you'll find quite a bit of information around that. And it's a great decision-making model, actually, that you can help work through with yourself or with your mentor or with your mentee. One of the continuums that I developed, because I really like this idea of process as being part of that decision, a part of that skillful questioning, is what I call the 3 E's. And so as an example of the 3 E's continuum, what this is saying is that when you are in a meeting or a situation or something's come up in a conversation, what's the level, where are you starting? What's your starting point with your questions? So if it's hey, I don't really know anything that's going on at the moment, then you start at that first level of established. Let's find out what's going on. Let's find out what the situation is. Let's find out what's happening for this person. And I've just given a couple of examples of some questions you can ask there as a mentor or mentee. If you've got there, or the next stage may be then, okay, so I want to find out some more about that, or we need to talk more about this so we really uncover a bit more about what's going on. So that's expanding on that initial finding, you know, setting the scene, getting the context. So let's expand on that. So they're expanding questions. They're helping the person to actually give more information, to be able to dig a little bit deeper and delve a bit more into what's going on and what they might be wanting to talk about or needing to talk about. And then that last level, which is explore. So actually, let's take what we've got already from expanding and let's really dig a bit deeper again. So for me, a classic example is that if you've just met your mentor or your mentee for the first time, you don't usually start with explore questions because it's way too soon. To ask them is like, how do you think I should be able to deal with this, or what I think might happen is, well, we don't know what the situation is fully yet to answer that question. So let's go back to establish. So that's what I mean by questioning continuums and how useful they can be as a process to help you help the other person understand the situation and to help them answer and get really clear about what's going on and therefore how that conversation will go. So that's just one example of a continuum, but it really reflects that decision-making pyramid of having a process. You've got the purpose, you've got the content, therefore, the questions you want to ask, and then put that into the process. What's a continuum process or approach you can take to ensure that questioning works really well for you and for the other person? I know it's not a lot. We could talk a lot more about this, but as another poll, final poll we'd like you to do is when you think about your skill in questioning and asking effective questions, how would you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? So Lesley, if you could do that poll, and we'll just see what people answer to that. Okay, we've got some 10s, okay, 9s, some 6, 5s and 4. Right, great. Thanks for giving the answer. Thanks for engaging in the poll. I think it's just a really useful way of thinking about how good or how effective do I think I am at that. I think the next question that I would always put is like, how do you know that? What's some of that evidence that you collect and that tells you that that this is actually a really core skill of yours? And if you're not sure, if you're thinking that perhaps those people at 4 and 5, again, I'd come back to that question like, so what could you do to move towards 10? What are some of the things that you could do to improve and build and develop that skill of questioning? Because it's so inherent in that whole mentoring relationship and that mentoring interaction, and helps us to listen more effectively too. So again, food for thought and some reflective questions for yourself to ask. Okay, and then the last essential communication skill that I always talk about in mentoring and in all my mentoring work is this model that I call strengths-focused feedback, which is a bit of a mouthful. And I'm going to not talk too much to it because it is a model that needs quite a bit of unpacking. But at the same time, you can see here that there's an example of how the model works. And probably the main points to make in terms of differentiating it from our traditional feedback sandwich, that hey, you're doing this well, but you could do this better, and you're doing this well, is a couple of things. One, it takes out the word but. So it starts with the positive comment and focusing on a strength or a skill a person has, but it uses the word and. So that it actually, what it's saying is it builds, and its intention is to help that person build on that strength or skill that you have pointed out, rather than immediately bringing something that they're not doing so well and they need to actually fix or do better. So they've taken the word but out and put the word and in, and it just means that you focus on that person's skill or strength and how to build it or develop it or do it more. Because when we hear the word but, most of us shut down. We know that something, if the but's there, it's like, okay, so you've told me I've done something well, but I know you're going to tell me something I'm not doing well. And it's just so easy to shut off from that, then to shut down. And as a powerful word, joining word is very, very powerful. It's very strong. The third part of the model is not enough to say, hey, you're doing this well and you could build on it by doing this, but also that there's a reason why you're giving them the feedback. And that's the third part, which is because. So you actually explain the purpose for why you're telling them this. Otherwise, it's just a comment that sits in the air and it's like, so what do you want me to do with that? That's great, but what about it? So the because is very important, but this is why I'm giving you the feedback, and this is what I see would happen as a consequence of that. And then the last part, which I really like in this model, and I think is very important, is that it brings in that reciprocal process. So you ask the other person how they see it, because that gives them the opportunity and the chance to say, I get it, or actually I don't understand what you're telling me, or actually I don't agree. You haven't seen what I've been doing, or you haven't really, maybe I haven't told you enough about my situation, because that's not what's going on. So that reciprocal part of it comes in nicely with that fourth step. So main things for me are like, replace the word but with and. It's a strengths-focused way of giving feedback. It has a purpose statement within it, and then it asks for the other person to contribute and join that conversation, join that feedback process, which I think is really vital. And obviously with that, in terms of talking about reciprocal process, I think that's something that's our responsibility as mentors and mentees. It's just as important for us as mentees to give feedback to our mentors sometimes, or as leaders, obviously, to give feedback to our team or our employees. But that reciprocal process is also about, I've asked for the other person's feedback, for example, like that fourth step. What do you think? I've actually got to be receptive to that. I'm not just doing it because I think that's the right thing to do because it's good. I actually need to respond to that, and I need to be aware of how I'm responding to it, and what are some of perhaps the emotional triggers or all sorts of things or the drivers that can be influencing the way I respond. But I've actually got to be responsible for responding to feedback as well, particularly if I ask for it. So there's just some ideas and some thoughts about how you can do that, again, to reflect on that for yourself and use that type of feedback model in your own practice, be that in your leadership practice or your mentoring practice. I don't always just quote Stephen Covey, but his work fits in nicely here. It takes humility to seek feedback. It takes wisdom to understand it, analyze it, and appropriately act on it. I think that's right. We need to be seeking it as mentors and mentees. We also need to then think about, like, what do we do with that, and what's going to be our next action because of it. A self-evaluation checklist for you. So this is your coming back to the roadmap. So we've got the identity, we've got the essential communications, or the essential skills, I should say, the trust, the communication skills. We also need to engage in that self-evaluation. And in a sense, I've sort of been prompting and saying that that's something to do all the way through the session today, that self-reflection. So I'm not going to talk through these, but there's some examples of some questions you could ask yourself to really do that self-review and evaluation. As a mentor, what am I doing? How am I influencing? How am I getting some benefit from this? And as a mentee, what am I doing? How's my mentor supporting me? What changes am I making? What work am I putting in to make the changes that I want? So there's some questions that, again, add to your toolkit for your self-reflection and self-review, which I think should be an ongoing, and I use the word should be an ongoing process through anything that we're doing, particularly in that professional context. And just to, 4, I don't want you to do much. You just say 1. Again, to finish with is action steps. So you come to a session like this, we talk about a whole lot of different concepts and practices and tools and methods and models. What are you going to do with that? What's a takeaway for you? What's something that you can take away from today that you can use in your own practice as a mentor or a mentee? And that's going to influence the quality of that mentoring relationship that you're in as well. So I'm going to leave you with that, because I'm aware with the time that we did want to have some time for question and answer if there were any questions. So thank you. I think, that's your takeaway. Sorry, yeah. So same question. Given the map that we've followed today, is what is something that you will take away from the session and do something with? And it might have been an aha moment of that confirms that what I'm doing is working or is right in this space that we call mentoring. Or it might be something that you haven't thought about for a long time or for a while. It's that reminds me I need to actually bring that back into my practice. Or you might have got something new from today. So my hope is that one of those 3 points has been triggered or prompted for you today. So thank you very much. That is me, and I'll stop sharing and see if we have any questions, or if anyone would like to make a comment or you've got a question, absolutely, please do fire away.
Lesley, if I just build a little bit on the question I gave you before about what are the underlying motivations behind a person, and can you really listen to that? I'm reminded of there are some executives who rose through the ranks of their corporation because of their ability to read the room.
Thanks, John. I think, like for me, that a part of that does come back to being really using questions well to do that. And certainly something I haven't talked about today and you brought up, which is spot on too, is that whole conversation around body language and indicators of what, the way that people might be saying something, but they are looking differently to what they're saying. Yeah. And I think that, when I hear myself in my mentoring training workshops with mentors and with mentees, but probably particularly with mentors, is getting them to be really thinking about it, which is a little bit what I was saying, and sorry if I'm still not really addressing or answering your question, but really getting them to think about that it isn't about just sort of asking questions saying, oh, well, the mentee's told me this, so we can now go and find a solution. That we need to take that time and we need to take that attention, you have that attention, as you use that word too, to spend that time to find out that stuff. And it might not be, and this is something else I talk about a lot, is it might not happen in the first or the second or third meeting, but it's more that conscious awareness that, like you said, that that there is something going on, but that person may not be ready to talk about it yet, but not to give up on that and to get really comfortable. And I think that that's a responsibility of us as mentors, particularly, is do some research around it if we're not sure and it's sort of nothing seems to be coming out. It's like maybe there are some other questions I could be asking, or some other ways in which I can address, talk to this or get that person to talk to me. And I think that it's sometimes a bit of time. Like I'm working with a group of women leaders in Papua New Guinea at the moment. We've set up a mentoring program to support their leadership and their confidence, and leadership development. And the mentors continually report back to me in their community practice meetings that their mentee won't talk a lot and they find it really hard to get the conversation going, and they know that they've, and I think it's for them, they're recognizing that their mentees, and it's a cultural thing too, their mentees looking up to them saying, there's no way I've got anything I want to ask you, or really, can I talk about myself, because you're the expert. You're the person that knows it. Who am I to do that? So I think there's a whole lot of dimensions, human dimensions, things that can be going on that can influence how we can get that person, how we can find out what really is going on behind that person, what they're saying up front. Yeah. So, yeah, hopefully it was helpful.
Lesley and John, may I interject?
Go, Marie.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I am a professional coach, and my work overlaps a lot to the role of a mentor in the way of being there and creating a safe space and being in an environment of inquiry. But sometimes when you already have a trust with someone in front of you, you can just simply ask, you look different today. I noticed that your voice, it sounds a little bit faster, and today your voice is in slow mode. What's going on? And you just give the person a chance to express. Probably the person haven't even noticed that they are sounding different. And by you just describing without judging or evaluating, just describing how you're perceiving their voice, in why it sounds different to you, you are giving the person relevant information that allows the person to realize that they are showing up differently. And that opens up a conversation that can be just the way they're feeling, and that might be a relevant topic for that day. At least that's how I address it.
Yeah, and thanks, Marie, because I like the language of I notice that, rather than you look like you're this, or this is going on. But the I notice is that it's sort of bringing it back to you of what you're seeing, and therefore, do you want to tell them about it, or let's find out why. So I think that's really nice language to use, and really powerful language. Yeah, thank you.
To add on to what John raised, in order to get action, many times after getting what do you want answered, we follow it with, and what would it feel like if you got that? Because logic will get it on the list, which I stuck in the chat, but emotion gets it scheduled.
Nice. I've written that down, Chuck. I like. Thank you.
Well, here's another one. Also in your chat, under promise. And by the way, this has been said by many people like yourself who are trying to help people to be more effective in leadership. Under promise, over deliver. Thank you for allowing me to share.
Thanks, Chuck. Yes, I did see that in the chat.
I can see that it's 7:31 now. So if you have more questions, please, and if you're all willing to stay on, that'd be great. After this Q&A session, I will just go ahead and do some quick reminders of our events in the next few weeks. So I'll take maybe about 3 to 5 minutes for that. Announcements for the next few weeks. So we are going to have, we're going to have our Mentoring Matters talk earlier in the month of November because of Thanksgiving. So instead of the 4th Thursday, we're going to have it on the 2nd Thursday of the month. So that's November 11th. So we're going to have Josie Haynes again. She has done, this is the 3rd in her series of talks. She did empathetic leadership, allyship with regard covering inclusion and diversity, and now she will focus on women leaders in tech. And we continue to hold our clubhouse sessions. I will be reaching out to our mentors who have not done their stories and are comfortable doing their stories to be featured in our clubhouse sessions. We hold 2 sessions weekly. One is every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific time, and then Thursday 9 a.m. Pacific time. So next week we're going to have Roy and Emily. So if you're interested to get to know your fellow mentors, or for the mentees, the mentors that may be able to help you based on their own journeys, then please go ahead and join us in these sessions. And then we continue to have our yoga practice. So we're not publishing this on Eventbrite. If you'd like to have a link, please email me so that I can share that with you, and I can put you into the group conversation with Deepali, who's also one of our mentors. And then we are all about serving mentees in this community, or helping them develop themselves to become better leaders. So if you know of other potential mentees, please go ahead and have them reach out to me. Likewise for mentors, mentors who are ready to give back. And then we do need more volunteers to run our programs, events, and fundraisers. As you know, we have been trying to raise funds to hire full-time employees, but right now we're still fully dependent and happily working with really dedicated volunteers right now. And so we want more of the likes of the volunteers that we currently have. So if you know anybody within your network who are trying to develop certain skills, so we will get to guide them as well. So we want to add value all around. As they're adding value to our organization, we also want them to get that value in terms of developing specific skills in themselves. So we'll definitely have a helpful community of volunteers to do that. And if you know of people that you can promote our organization, definitely recurring donations are very much welcome. And lastly, feedback for this session. You will probably see more emails from me in the month of December to do another survey, so that it's like looking back at the year, what were effective? What do we need to do more of? We're even thinking of exploring group mentoring in 2022. So as another way to make sure that we develop a cohesive community among our mentors and mentees. But for this particular session, feel free to click this link. And you'll also get a reminder from Eventbrite. You can click the survey link there, as well as you will get a link for the session materials. And with that, we are done with our session. Again, thank you very much for being here. I'm really very happy to see all of you.